Hey, this is Nate Wells.
And this is Drew Cove.
Check out our podcast, that Go for Hockey podcast, for the latest news and updates on University of Minnesota hockey. You can find us on iTunes, and we're also on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
That's elite.
The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast from the Cumulus Studios. We managed to make our way down the hallways and corridors and find the decrepit room that now hosts this podcast.
The Zone Coverage broom closet.
Yes. The cupboard under the stairs.
It's soundproofed. It's soundproofed.
That's the important thing.
I am your host, Giles Farrell. Across from me with a mouse of a Chevy Camaro is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And that should tell you how much I know of cars. I can't even tell you what the hell it is.
Happy Rusev Day to everyone.
Next to me producing is Tom Schreier.
I'm finally allowed back on. I'm surprised Tin Whiskers didn't discourage you.
2 weeks in a row.
It's tough for the audience.
Yeah, they're gonna
tougher
for
Giles.
Well, I guess last week's ratings were through the roof, so I guess
we have ratings.
What the hell? Yeah, we try to have some.
Oh, okay.
But, this is our special playoff preview episode. So this will be episode 147 of the Giles and the Goalie podcast. Episode 146 recaps the Minnesota Wild regular season. We do kind of go over some topics of the end of the year and then hit our over-unders and all that good stuff. So if that's what you're looking for, do check that out. But this is where we talk about the Minnesota Wild versus the Winnipeg Jets in the 2018 Stanley Cup Playoff Western Conference quarterfinals, Central Division semifinals.
Right.
Back in the day when they used to call it like the Norris Division semifinals, and they used to get banners for like winning that part of the bracket. So it's a Norris Division playoff champion.
For winning like 2 rounds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They obviously don't do that anymore. Either that or just Washington chooses to make all those odd banners, which
now they just retire numbers
really,
for fans, which is way better.
Which they really do. We're number one.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're new to the show, do check us out. We have a SoundCloud. That's how you listen to podcasts. Check us there, Giles and the Goalie. Find us on iTunes. Subscribe. Give us a rating. Helps boost the show up in the iTunes algorithm. And then we also have a YouTube channel where we'll do some game previews, game recaps, certainly through the playoff series here. So that is just a quick promo. To get going, the Minnesota Wild, Winnipeg Jets, this is their first ever meeting in the Stanley Cup Playoff of Minnesota version 2.0 and Winnipeg version 2.0.
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
Man, how great would it be to play the series in North Stars versus Jets 1.0 uniforms?
So the Jets could. We talked about this in the interview, but they could, right? They could bring back those jerseys that they used for the Heritage Classic, and I think wore in some regular season games, didn't they, last year?
I think they only wore them during like warm-ups.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think this year the league has mandated only a home and a road uniform, so we won't get our wish.
Right.
I'm just saying, going forward, at some point in the near future.
They could.
They'll have us back.
And
they're so much better.
I think the Wild could. I believe if they wanted to, they could do some homage to the North Stars, but
they did in the outdoor game.
Yeah, but I don't think they want to.
And it's so off-brand. I'm just saying the Jets would be off-brand.
Good. Yeah, Jets totally could. It's the same name because the city that took the way of the Jets didn't rape and defile the name of the team so that it could be reused again in its former city. That's the difference there between Phoenix and Dallas.
In fact, this is one of the few instances where
Dallas is a bunch of rapers and defilers, and Phoenix is a bunch of old people that don't care about their hockey team, so they named it whatever.
The Yotes. But the Dallas Stars, North Stars is one of the few examples, right, where they actually took the name. Like I'm thinking.
Oh, don't forget about the Lakers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it happens in Minnesota a lot.
I thought about this the other day.
Yeah.
Like, think of how great like the Minnesota sports like logos and team name landscape would be if the Lakers were still here and the North Stars.
Not only that, but the Lakers use MPLS jerseys now as a third
we
jersey.
know. Yeah, we've heard.
They can go right to hell. You'd have the Lakers, the North Stars, the Vikings, and the Twins.
Yeah.
I almost forgot about them.
See, when the Twins took the Senators, they didn't call them the Minnesota Senators or anything to that effect.
No, I'm just thinking in hockey specifically.
Like
what is another example of someone relocating a team?
Flames.
Good call.
Yeah.
Good call.
The Flams.
Yeah, and the A, and they still have the A. That's the Atlanta A.
That's a nice little homage.
Yeah, because like the Atlanta had like a fire.
Yeah, it was the
Jets.
Sherman Scorcher strategy.
Whereas
Jets.
I don't know that ever happened in Calgary.
It'd be great if the Jets found a way.
That's when the oil catches fire.
It'd be great if the Jets found a way to incorporate the Atlanta Thrashers into their A, like the Calgary Flames.
Yeah.
Just make it like a bird, like wing.
Thrashers never had great jerseys, though.
God no.
Remember the Atlanta down the sleeve, and then
blues.
they had like the one it was like brown or whatever that color was that had Thrashers on front. Yeah,
Tom, I got to be honest. They were not good.
No, nothing.
Their best
about
jersey was the white jersey with just like the shield
their
type logo.
First draft,
it was okay, but it was like, not good.
No, first draft, and then they only used the T for a while. Which what the hell?
That was gross.
First draft, they passed on both the Sedins. Do you know this?
Really?
They took some guy who was a bust, Patrick Stefan, I think, and then they passed on both Sedins, who now are just retiring.
All right,
I think that's right. Actually,
that's
I was about to say like they came in the same year as a while, but I was thinking of
they came in a year before
the Columbus Blue Jackets, who we'll tell. Yeah, you're right. The Atlanta Thrashers with the first overall pick took Patrick Stefan. But that's because the Sedins made it pretty well known that they wanted to be on the same team.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of juggling there that I'm not familiar with, but I know that
I didn't know. I guess it makes sense, but I didn't know that the Sedins went like Eli Manning on the bit.
Right.
Yeah, they did.
Made their demands clear.
They made it very known that they were going to play together and not at all.
Oh wow. Okay.
So all right. We have tangented very. But to preview the playoff series, obviously there's no previous playoff history with these two teams, so do get ready for some old Jets North Stars highlights in your TV package.
Gotcha.
But to recap the regular season series between the Minnesota Wild and the Winnipeg Jets, these two teams played 3 times before the month of November was out, and then they played their final game on January 13th. So they have not met in almost 4 months. But the Winnipeg Jets take 3 out of 4 games in this series. In fact, they won the first 3 games of this series. First 2 games were both 1-goal games, Jets winning at Winnipeg and then at Minnesota 4-3, 2-1. And then we remember the November 27th game collectively as Wild fans as the end of the Kyle Quincy era.
Oh, God.
The Jets mopped the floor with the Minnesota Wild 7-2 in that game, and that was Kyle Quincy's final game, and you could see the writing on the wall with how
so
bad he was in that hockey game. And
the guy they signed like early on, right? It's like, we got him.
That was
their only free agency sign.
Yes.
That was the second most popular YouTube recap we did on the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I think it was actually our Facebook, but it was still the second most popular recap we did this year because it literally involved me pouring out a glass of whiskey, drinking it, and the most popular one had pretty much the same concept, except it was post-game of a Wild Avs game, which I lost a bet to Ben this year, so I had to wear my least favorite jersey on the recap, and it turned out that was the only game that week that I was at home and had the jersey at my disposal, and of course was my Avs jersey.
Right.
So I pour out a bottle of whiskey again, drink that while I did the recap, and it did very well in Colorado.
Are you happier that Colorado beat St. Louis to get into the playoffs, or were you kind of cheering for the Fighting Yos to knock out
This is a good question. I've seen some different sides of this on the old Twitter.com.
Kind of lose-lose, really.
It's a pick your poison, I guess. I'd rather see just nudging out a little bit, but I'd rather see the Blues because I hate the Avalanche and their fans.
I think the Avalanche have a better shot of upsetting the Predators than the Blues did. I don't.
That makes sense.
That doesn't
It's
mean
not a lot.
anything. That doesn't mean anything to the Wild. I don't think. I mean, unless you're looking that far ahead for some reason. But then I would like the Wild's chances against the Avalanche better than I would against the Predators. So there is that. They have a better shot of facing a team that they're better than. I guess if that makes sense.
I'm following your logic. It's just funny this is one of those things I asked about and we might want to touch on the Jets' Wild potential rivalry, but because they have a rivalry with basically everyone else in the division, it is kind of fun because they kept on showing highlights obviously during the broadcast with the Wild, and you got to imagine the fan base was continued to react to it because in one case it's your former coach that knocked you out in the first round, in the other one it's just probably the most storied history maybe between two teams in the division, at least from the Wild perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, those games are not only fighting on the ice, but you occasionally see fighting in the Pepsi Center.
Yeah. The can.
So to, I guess, again, to kind of dive into the recap of the Wild and Jets season series here, Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele leading the Jets with 6 points in 4 games against the Minnesota Wild each. 2 goals, 4 assists for Blake Wheeler, the former University of Minnesota Gopher, and then Mark Scheifele, who was drafted at 2011 at XL Energy Center. And if you look at his draft photo, I love to point this out, he is wearing a generic NHL jersey because that night they announced the Winnipeg team name was going to be the Jets, so they did not have anything readily available except a generic NHL jersey.
They couldn't rustle up an old Jets jersey. I mean,
right. It's not like it's the Columbus Blue Jackets or something. Yeah.
Kyle Connor had 5 points. Nick Ehlers, Dustin Byfuglien 3 points. Patrick Laine only 2 goals, 2 points in this season series. So the Wild seemingly did okay in that regards of limiting Patrick Laine, but they did not limit the rest of the Winnipeg Jets in the regular season series. And to flip the script here and go from a Minnesota Wild perspective, as I punch this in on my lovely computer. I would want to have this available. Jason Zucker had 4 points. Are you ready for this? Also tied with Mr. Zucker at 4 points against the Jets this year.
Daniel Winnick.
No.
Chris Stewart.
The Moose.
Oh,
Marcus Foligno.
Wow.
That would have been my last.
goal
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
God.
Shooting a robust 12.5% in those 4 games. Charlie Coyle, 3 points. Chris Stewart, one of 4 players tied with 2 points. Chris Stewart going to be a big factor in this postseason series from his couch.
I think there's something to be said for that because, and as much as I am a very unabashed critic of Marcus Foligno and Chris Stewart, the Jets are huge. And I think that size is, and certainly a lot of folks like to discount that as a factor in any kind of hockey whatsoever. I know that's part of the stats folks kind of viewpoint, but I think there's something a little bit to be said for that size is going to play a factor. And certainly the Wild can overcome size. I'm not saying that the Jets are going to win because they're big. But I think that there's something to say for those big guys having success against the Jets because, we've all seen Dustin Byfuglien turn Mikael Granlund into a splatter mark on the half wall how many times now, so I think there's something to be said for that.
It's like that scene from Men in Black where the bug hits the truck right at the beginning. Goddamn bugs.
Yeah.
I mean, it is of concern that you look at the highest, point totals for the Wild. Eric Stahl should be fine, right? Big dude.
Right.
But Granlund, small, might get snuffed out. Yep. Zucker, small, speedy, might get stuffed out. You get Suitors out. Dumba we'll get to, but you kind of got to go down the line to find the Coils and the Koivus and stuff.
Yeah,
and then to kind of look at the goaltending matchup here in the season series at least. Devin Dubnyk only started 2 games against the Jets this year. Alex Stalock got the other 2 starts, but obviously Alex Stalock will no longer be starting in goal. God forbid. But in the 2 starts he had against the Jets this year, Devin Dubnyk, 1-1, 253 goals against average, 921 save percentage.
It's not bad.
And Connor Hellebuck started all 4 games for the Jets against the Wild this year. Went 3-1, 2.5 goals against average, 914 save percentage in those games. So that's
relatively mediocre considering Hellebuck's had a fantastic season. I mean, he's 924 for the season, 914 against the Wild, so he did actually not fare as well against the Wild as he did everyone else.
So I guess just starting to look at the playoff series here, kind of look at a forward perspective, and we'll definitely get more into this in a little bit with Murata Tesh of Winnipeg Athletics going to help us kind of break down the Jets. But just from a forward perspective, looking at who has the advantage, it's obviously got to be Winnipeg just because of the sheer depth they had. They got 8 players if you count Paul Stasny's point total from the whole season with 39 or more points, and you got Blake Wheeler sitting at the top with 91, Laine with 70, and his 44 goals. I mean, this is a team that packs serious punch, and I was on a radio yesterday, and I said that the Jets remind me a lot of the Wild last year, except the Jets have a lot of top-end talent, which is going to be huge in this series. And we have certainly debated time and time again that the Wild's depth, especially on the road, is killer for them. And this is where they need that fourth line, which has been playing well here in the last 2 weeks and change. This is where they need them to continue that play, because otherwise, I mean, realistically, that's where the Wild are going to get killed, and that's probably where the series is going to be won or lost.
Yeah, to your point, 8 players above 39 points. The Wild have 4 forwards above 39 points.
Is that good?
Yeah. Stahl, Granlund, Zucker, Koivu. That's it.
Coyle didn't make
it. Coyle just missed 37. Nino at 32. Obviously, injury-plagued seasons for both of those guys. But, the depth thing was kind of, we've hit on that all season long, and this is where it comes to a head, because now you're facing a team that is not only good at the top end, like the Blues were with Tarasenko. Now you've got a team that has a Tarasenko type in Patrick Laine. And, by the way, they've got 3 other lines that can score just as well, which the Blues certainly didn't have last season. So, this is where the where the S hits the fan, where the bug hits the windshield.
And you mentioned this earlier, but a team built to eliminate 2 of the Wild's top scorers, right? Granlund and Zucker. And
yeah,
so
it's a very big team on top of being a very skilled team. So it's a tough test, and that depth is going to be the biggest test for this defense.
The truth of the matter, looking broadly for the Wild, you have to beat the teams in your division. I understand that they could end up playing Vegas, they could end up playing Nashville, who's in the division, but in some ways, if you can't get past this team, they're not going away, I don't think, right?
No.
So
way too young.
So this isn't even a Blues situation where it's like Jake Allen stood on his head and now he's not good, right? So it's not even that. It's truly just this team. This is what you have in front of you. If you can't get past it, it's weird comparing the Jets and Chicago, but Chicago was like that too. You can't compete with Taves and Kane, you're not going to go anywhere. Right. And this is kind of the same deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think it is like a kind of almost a passing of the torch of the Blackhawks to the Jets, where like the Jets are good right now. And like I said, they're young. They've got a couple of guys on entry-level deals that are tearing it up, and they're not going away anytime soon. So the Wild, I think, and we can certainly get to this, but I think the only shot they really have is exploiting a defense that isn't, it's not a terrible defensive team, but they certainly that's their weak spot. Hellebuck played really well, but their defensive core can be exploited a little bit. And Hellebuck, I think you have to find a way to get to him somehow and not let him control the series. And Dubnyk has to steal a few, and that's just basically the only shot they have, because matching tit for tat with their offense is just not going to happen.
So my next thing was going to be, like, you look at the defense for each team and who has the advantage. Is it Winnipeg simply because Suter's out for Minnesota, or do you see the depth Minnesota's kind of able to have at defense, maybe with all their more youthful players who have seemingly fared really well here in the last week of the regular season, although playoff hockey is a totally different animal.
Right.
But do we kind of agree maybe it's still the Jets just because Ryan Suter goes down, or does the imminent return of Jared Spurgeon seemingly for Game 1 kind of maybe tip that back in the favor of Minnesota?
I think that the Suter injury obviously closes the gap pretty considerably. I mean, there's no way around that. He's, by all measures, one of the better defensive defenders in the NHL. But I'm not super impressed with the Jets' defensive core. I mean, Dustin Byfuglien is kind of his own special unicorn animal. I mean, we've all been well acquainted with Rozo's finest, but I think that there's something to be exploited there. I think that they can get Dustin Byfuglien, for as good as he is with the offense. He's what people in Minnesota think Matt Dumba is. He's that kind of defender. Like, he's probably worse, in his own zone with the puck than Dumba is. But he's well known because he's kind of built for the playoffs. He's a big, lumbering dude. He's got a heavy shot. He can make things happen on the offensive end. I think that there's something. I think that the Wild still have the advantage defensively, just because I think they have defenders who are pure defenders. Murat will talk about Myers kind of being an offensive guy as well, but not particularly great in his own zone. So I think there's still some advantage there for the Wild. I think they still have it, although it's a lot, it narrowed considerably with the Suter injury.
In the harder thing, right. So Suter's big, right? Because he had the size, maybe could eliminate some of their...
Absolutely.
But the other problem is Spurgeon is obviously a plus coming back.
Yeah.
But size is not
right
there, right? So, I mean, that's the tough thing, is this is just a bad matchup, I think.
And the other thing that worries me about Spurgeon coming back is it doesn't seem like he's going to be coming back at 100%. No. It's going to be of a 70%, 80% variety. And on our show last week, Joe Bully kind of brought this up, like, what realistically are you going to expect from Jared Spurgeon back seemingly so soon and, not at full strength? Like, is that going to be a plus for this team? So just with the injuries and the relative, youth on the back end, I mean, for crying out loud, Nate Prosser, not a young guy, but he's now your second pair defenseman right now. I slightly give the edge to Winnipeg, and if Spurgeon comes back, then that probably tips the scales for me back over to Minnesota, just barely. But big minutes are going to be logged by Jonas Brodin and Matt Dumba in this series, and we're going to kind of get on this a little bit. But these two are going to have to carry the boat.
Yeah.
They're going to have to literally row the boat, to use a PJ Fleck.
We're in Dinky Town. He can't help himself.
Right.
That's frightening, but for me, I look at this kind of a glass half full. Like, I think these two are kind of ready to take this challenge, and they've been really well together since, December. Mm. So I love that pair, and they're going to have to log a lot of minutes, but the back end of the defense still scares me. Quickly going ahead, in goal, and we're going to really... that'll transition into our goaltender matchup as well, but who has the advantage in goal between Connor Hellebuyck and Devin Dubnyk? Connor Hellebuyck obviously setting a record for an American-born goaltender with 44 wins this season, 924 save percentage, 236 goals against average, 6 shutouts, going up against Devin Dubnyk, 35 wins on the season, 252 goals against average, 918 save percentage, 5 shutouts. Who are you giving the edge to in this playoff series? The goalie whisperer, Ben Remington.
It's really tough because I think the most important thing in the playoffs is goaltender play, and the hardest thing to predict in the playoffs, I think, is goaltender play.
Marc-Andre Fleury and Ilya Bryzgalov filling up the phone lines for you.
Yeah, and Jake Allen. And, Pekka Rinne last year, he was not... People forget about how kind of bad he was.
He was not good in the regular season, and then
before the playoffs last year, and then he just carried that team and has, followed that up with a phenomenal, almost Vezina campaign this season. So, Hellebuyck certainly was better in the regular season. I don't think there's much debating that. He certainly played on a better team as well. That helps. But I think you give the edge to Hellebuyck right now. He had a better regular season. We mentioned. We'll mention in our review briefly. He's finished the season hot. Still, he's been playing well down the stretch, even though he's got a lot of time in the net. But I think it's kind of like the defense thing. I think it's really neck and neck. Whereas the forward battle we talked about was not neck and neck. But the defense, I think, is neck and neck with Suter's injury. The goaltending situation is neck and neck because Devin Dubnyk is a player that can get hot. We haven't really seen him kind of lit on fire. He started to get hot in December, then he got hurt. And he started to get a little bit hot in April here. And, obviously it's only a handful of games. So we'll see if he can continue that. He had a .938 save percentage in April. It's pretty solid. we'll see if he can continue that, and that's obviously the biggest question about Dubnyk is, he's kind of been a little bit up and down in the playoffs. He hasn't been bad, I don't think, in the playoffs, but he also, I don't think, has really stolen a series in the playoffs yet. And this is the one, this is a shining example of a time where he needs to steal a series.
It is the cliche thing to say in the playoffs where goaltending is going to win just about most series. But, as we learned last year, I'll put my left hand over the Bible and swear that goaltending does indeed win you series, as Jake Allen just obliterated hopes and dreams.
Right.
And then and you look at his stats this year.
Yeah, right.
Boy. But I worry about Connor Hellebuck's games played at 67, which is a large workload.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And even if the Jets move on from the series, it'll still be a concern in my head for picking the Jets moving forward. Because you look at what a goalie should be doing in a regular season, kind of a workload to give him a fair amount, but not overusing him like the Oilers did with Cam Talbot. And it's around like 55, 60 games, and we set that in our preseason over-unders as, that's kind of the benchmark you want your goaltender to kind of hit, or your starting goaltender, I should say, kind of hit. And, Dubnyk really only hit that mark this year because he was hurt.
Right.
And then seemingly Alex Stalock had lost some favor with the head coach moving down the stretch. But, I do worry about Connor Hellebuck's games played and, no playoff experience. So I wonder if there's just going to be a game where he kind of goes Darcy Kemper on the Jets and, bad goal gets let in and then, 3 more bad goals go in. And so I said this when I did the radio spot, that the key for the Wild is simply to attack the defense and just shoot the puck, because you don't know what you're going to get, especially early on from Connor Hellebuck. Just get the puck on net. Don't try to do that fancy crap that they try to do sometimes. The overthinking it, especially on odd man rushes.
Yeah, overpassing.
Just shoot the puck on odd man rushes. That hasn't really been a huge thing for the Wild here in the last few months, but early on in the year, remember, they could not hit an odd man rush to save their life. And if you're going to get those chances in this series, you've got to make the most of them. But that's kind of where I'm at. So long story short, I think I'm going to give the Wild the slightest of edge in the goaltending department. And I say that with the caveat of Devin Dubnyk looked pretty sharp here in the last week, and you hope that carries, especially with a few days off. When he gets longer rest, he comes back and he's playing with a vengeance. So that's kind of what I look forward to. Kind of looking now, I don't know, I guess I should point out what special teams are doing for each team before we move on here. But you look at the Minnesota Wild and Winnipeg Jets, both are pretty good in goal. The Jets were 5th in the NHL in goals against at 218. Minnesota 232. They were 11th, but I think you would probably argue that that had more to do with a certain backup goaltender, formerly out of the now national champion Minnesota Duluth Bulldogs.
Stalock maybe contributed a little bit, but I think Dubnyk wasn't as sharp this season as we maybe expected him to be. And
as we also said, he hasn't really taken off he has every year.
No, usually every year he has a solid month where he absolutely is just the surface of the sun, and we really didn't get that this season.
Which you hope happens now.
I've made that point for 2 seasons now, and you can wish in one hand and in the other. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But if it does, great. That's like I said, that's the only. Realistically, that's the only Wild's only shot.
He's their X factor.
Yeah, that's their only shot. Quite honestly, you're not going to out offense this, and you can exploit their defense a little bit, and maybe you can get to Hellebuck. But I mean, maybe Hellebuck folds. But I kind of doubt it. I kind of doubt that he's going to have a sub 900 series.
It's the opposite for Winnipeg. I think if Hellebuck chokes, that's their Achilles heel. If Dubnyk, you know what I mean? So it's opposite for them. He could screw it up for them.
He can lose it for him.
He just has to be okay.
But he doesn't have to win it for him.
Yeah.
Whereas Dubnyk definitely has to win this series for the Wild. And if he's okay or worse, they're going to lose. Like he can't be like a 915 save percentage, 920 save percentage in that range. He's going to have to take it to a new level.
And then something else that really factors into playoff series, special teams. You especially remember early in the season when the Wild were getting the Jets, 3 times before the month of November was out. The Wild had a problem where teams were blowing by them and they weren't drawing penalties. The Wild were taking penalties, but they weren't drawing penalties. And that was perhaps more exemplified when they played Winnipeg, a very young, a very fast hockey team. So to kind of highlight the special teams, power play on the regular season, the Winnipeg Jets, 23.3% power play, 5th best in the National Hockey League. And then the Minnesota Wild, 20.4%, 18th best in the National Hockey League. The up and down power play that is the Minnesota Wild. And then to switch it over to the penalty kill, the Winnipeg Jets with a 81.7% penalty kill. And they also had 9 shorthanded goals. And then the Minnesota Wild with a 13th best penalty kill in the NHL, 81.2%, 7 shorthanded goal. Special teams obviously of a big importance in a playoff series, and the Jets have the decided edge. Not so much on the penalty kill, but you look at the power play and the firepower the Jets bring, and it kind of draws us back to the forward question. So penalty kill for the Minnesota Wild in this series is going to be huge, and that again kind of rolls back to Devin Dubnyk being sharp, but also the Wild need to roll with their penalty kill.
The other interesting thing is, are the Wild more disciplined because they've been there before? There's not really the playoff jitters. At this point, there may be frustration of, can we get out of the first, second round? Where the Jets maybe, now they're going to have the advantage, I think, of playing at home first, where refs, not intentionally, but tend to be better to the home team. It's a little bit of the crowds there and all that.
Yep. The whiteout.
But I guess I could see the Jets maybe getting some playoff jitters and taking dumb, or it could be just one dumb penalty or whatever, but I see that being more of a factor for them.
It could be, but I also think the Wild are going to have to play more discipline than they have this season too, because like Giles mentioned, they played from behind a lot. They've been outshot attempted by damn near every team they've played this season. They're going to have to be very disciplined to keep this fast team from being on the power play a lot, because they're going to get their doors blown off by this offense a little bit here and there, and they're going to have to be just smart about it and kind of hope that Devin Dubnyk bails them out. That's really their only shot, as we keep coming back to. But they can't take a boatload of penalties over and over and over again, because as you said, they're going to get eaten alive.
I think you're right. So they can't take penalties. I think if Winnipeg scores first, it's really going to be hard for the Wild to win, especially in the first 2 games there. And then I think the other thing is, you mentioned shot attempts. If they're out attempted, unless they're really from outer space, which I don't think they will be, I feel like that's also a...
That's been kind of the Wild MO, though, is that they've allowed a lot of attempts, but none in close.
I was going to say,
they've been one of the best teams literally in the NHL, not allowing high danger.
I was going to say, if you're looking at like a Corsi perspective, the Jets I think they were top 5 in the league this year, and the Wild were in the bottom 3.
5,
But you look at like expected goals for, the Wild had the best in the NHL this year. So
I think part of that also has to do with they don't do a lot of volume shooting either.
Right.
The Wild are very much wait for the perfect opportunity,
pass,
and then probably pass up the perfect opportunity because it wasn't perfect enough.
Shoot.
Yeah, that's...
Shoot.
Oh, God,
Shoot.
no. No.
All right. So kind of looking at the series now at large, who on the Wild, since we've already hammered it in that goaltending is the most important position in the season, in a playoff series.
Yeah.
Picking out one forward and one defenseman on the Minnesota Wild who need to step up and have a huge series for them to have a shot. Who is that player?
It's I'm just obliterating low-hanging fruit here, but Charlie Coyle, I think, is going to be...
You're obliterating low-hanging omelets.
Yes, I am.
Fruit ninja.
Yeah, basically. But I think that he needs to... this series is very important for a lot of reasons. Number one, his size. We've talked about this. He's a big guy, and he doesn't play like it a lot. But also, he's had a rough season. He's one of the most disappointing players, I feel like, on the Wild this season. And he needs to redeem that a little bit. And a lot of people have talked about them trading him this offseason. He was nearly traded in the season, I guess, for Pacioretty. That was kicked around. But if the Wild hope to have any kind of trade value out of him whatsoever, they need him to have a really good playoff. Like we saw with Marco Scandella last season, he had a really good playoff series, even though it was short. Charlie Coyle needs to bring something to the table. He needs to not be invisible in this series. He needs to use that size, use the skill that he has because he's a skilled guy. He needs to be there. He needs to be present in this series because, whether Devin Dubnyk steals the series or not, well, you need to score some goals. So someone's got to score some goals, and, if you can't count on the Preezes, the Granlunds, and the Zuckers of the world of manhandling these massive defensemen in front of the net for Winnipeg. So Coyle's kind of has to show up.
So I agree with that entirely. I just don't have a lot of faith that'll happen.
I'm not saying I do either. I'm saying he needs to.
Oh, yeah, a little.
I think the other thing, too, is a healthy Niederreiter would be really interesting.
Be
but
great.
at this point, it's his ankle, right? We're convinced he has a lingering
he's a
injury.
broken bone in his, yeah.
So my thing is, with that considered, it's really hard to put it a lot on Niederreiter, who would otherwise be a big X factor in the. I think for Jason Zucker, he is the size he is. He's scored 30 goals this year. Again, I go back to Winnipeg stands in your way now. And if he's going to be in that star category, you have to overcome your size, even against a team that's designed to snuff you out. Mm-hmm. To me, he is the guy that needs to step up, and I have some faith he will. I just, Granlund, it seems like, right? I mean, just kind of what we've seen so far. Now, again, he was injured, and I think it was a Chicago series or whatever where he really struggled. But I guess Zucker, to me, is a guy that if you want to kind of steal a series into me, I see the Wild as an underdog, a big underdog here. A guy like Jason Zucker has to step up.
Well, for it, I'm going to go with Joel Eriksson Ek.
Wow.
Who is in that bottom six, and as we're going to talk with Murat, it's going to be
depth. Yeah,
depth is a big concern, and Joel Eriksson Ek on the bottom line is going to be huge, and he needs to have a big series. He needs to continue to have that good play that a fourth line has had, and it starts with him. I'm sorry, Daniel Winnick isn't going to necessarily drive the boat there. Marcus Foligno is sure not going to be driving the boat there. Sure, at some point Jordan Greenway could probably slot in there with him, but it's going to start with Joel Eriksson Ek, who has not had a good season this year. For the whole body. You look at the whole body, not a good season. He had 16 points. And as we got on our regular season recap show, we set the over-under for Joel Eriksson Ek points this year at 35.5, which was a seemingly reasonable estimate for where he was going to start the year.
Right.
And then he just got bumped down the lineup. He didn't produce. He was so snake-bit.
Yeah.
And he finally got out of it. Now you wipe the slate clean. Everyone has 0 points in 0 games. He needs to have that coming out party that we see players have in the playoffs. And he needs to do that getting favorable matchups on the bottom line. It's Joel Eriksson Ek's time to shine. That's how I look at it. And then you flip it over to the defense, and I forgot what I told you. I am going to go with Nick Seeler. That's right. Because you took the other low hanging fruit.
I gave you options.
And
all right.
I'm just messing with you.
Okay.
Nick Seeler is going to probably play with Jared Spurgeon when Jared Spurgeon comes back, because they're not going to split Jonas Brodin and Matt Dumba.
No. You think so? You don't think Olofsson's going to be that guy? Because that's why I had kind of thought Olofsson, because he's the Suter replacement, as it were.
I see they probably have more faith at this point in Nick Seeler, so I see Nick Seeler getting that pairing with Jared Spurgeon. And you're not going to fill the shoes of Ryan Suter. No one is going to do that. Mm-hmm. But it has to be a collectively done thing. And, if you're going to play with Jared Spurgeon, some of your mistakes are going to get, or a lot of your mistakes are going to get covered. So I see Nick Seeler, especially as that physical presence, that sandpapery guy that the Wild maybe haven't had in playoff years past. He's had a really good end of the regular season here, and he needs that to carry over into the postseason, especially if he's going to play alongside Jared Spurgeon, because he's going to get a sharp uptick in minutes. Mm-hmm. And when you're on the ice that much, you're going to have the Jets coming after you time and time again, as they're so good all down the lineup. You have to be sharp, and Nick Seeler needs to be that guy.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think whoever is paired with Spurgeon, it kind of inevitably is going to be held up to Suter, which isn't fair.
No,
none of them are going to
not.
be Suter, but that's the reality, is that, the difference between their play and Suter's play is going to be cited in why the Wild lose this series if they do. It's like, well, we had Nick Seeler instead of Ryan Suter. What do you expect? That's going to be one of the narratives, I think, from apologetic Wild fans, but for better or for worse.
Who's your defenseman, Tom?
Jonas Rodin's an interesting one to me, just because, again, you go to the size, and that's the one guy in my mind who has the playoff experience, has tenure with the Wild, and has size. Yeah. And I think he'll, in some ways, be fortunate that, A, he's kind of invisible, and I mean that actually in a positive way.
Sure.
But also that the focus will be on Dubba, because Dubba makes a mistake, and Twitter's going to go,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right,
you know what?
right.
I gotta say this. There's a large Wild Facebook group. There's like 26,000 followers in it. And I have just enjoyed the civil war that is going on in that group right now over Matt Dumba being bad and Matt Dumba being good. Uh-huh. And it really came full circle when our friend Tony from Hockey Wilderness put out his article on Matt Dumba, because it got linked in there.
His article got linked in there and mine didn't?
Somebody threw it in there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tom, we need a boost in ratings. I'm just kidding. And it just...
Oh, yeah.
It is. I'm probably going to hell for enjoying watch fans kill each other over it, but...
No. That's what it's for.
Sorry, that was just a sidebar I had to share.
No, I think your point about Brodin is and my guy was Dumba, and not in that he needs to step up, he's not playing well enough. I think he's had a great season, and that's the article that I basically wrote a week before Tony wrote his, but it was that apparently didn't make it mainstream, but I think that we need to see him kind of take over a little bit, or not that we need to, or that it's required of Matt Dumba. He's still only 23 years old, 24 years old, whatever. But I think that he needs to show how good he is, even offensively, by carrying this team a little bit. We saw, and I'm not saying that Matt Dumba is Erik Karlsson, but we kind of saw that out of Erik Karlsson last season. I mean, he single-handedly willed the Senators to the Eastern Conference
away from the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and so it's maybe Matt Dumba isn't Erik Karlsson good. I'm not putting him in that kind of that air. But for this series, they're going to need some scoring, and then they're going to need some defending. So him and Brodin both, I think, is an incredibly important pairing, because they need to shut down the Jets and at the same time provide a little bit of offense. And I think you've got that in Brodin and you've got that in Dumba. You've got the possibilities for a pairing to do that.
The funny thing is the hockey nuts probably can evaluate Brodin pretty well in this, but the average person can evaluate Dumba easier, right? It's easier to see a bad turnover. It's easier to see a snipe if he scores, right?
Yeah.
Dumba's the kind of guy, though, that can be a hero or the GOAT.
Oh, yeah.
Because he could be the guy in overtime who snipes from the corner, right?
Yeah,
or he could, right.
Isn't hero and GOAT the same thing? GOAT, greatest.
Well,
I
doesn't
meant
mean
scapegoat.
that. Scapegoat versus Tom Brady.
Critical word, Miss Tom.
Oops,
I'm just kidding.
Well, the lexicon has changed, obviously, because now GOAT means something different than it did even 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So everyone keeps citing it.
All right. We are going to preview the Winnipeg Jets with Murat Atesh of the Winnipeg Athletic, and we will do so now. Joining us now on the Giles and the Goalie podcast hotline is from the Winnipeg, or the Athletic Winnipeg division, covering the Jets, is Murat Atesh. Murat, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first question I have for you here is, it has been hotly contested on social media all season long, but do you have anything to say in the defense of Winnipeg is a lovely city?
Ooh.
Yeah, well, geez, this is a tough question right off the hop, but no, Winnipeg's been my home for about 15 years, and I'm pretty passionate about it. Definitely a big fan of the different little social communities and the international nature of the city. A lot of places I love going and hanging out. I actually compare it a lot to Minneapolis too when I visited friends down there. Just a little smaller, a little less modern perhaps in some ways, but no, we're good people up here.
Did you see their response to the Sharks? Didn't the Sharks rip Winnipeg?
Yeah, I was gonna say just some rogue NHL team social media account out west, but Tom.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna pinpoint because they brought up three players said that's the place they don't want to go play, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And one of them was Justin Braun, who they identified from Minneapolis. He would be from White Bear Lake, which, as you guys like to point out, St. Paul suburb.
Yeah.
But they pointed out how Minneapolis, like on aggregate, is not that much colder than Winnipeg and stuff like that.
No, not really.
It doesn't help when Michael Russo is like, I'd rather go to Nashville or Vegas, and I can't get Wi-Fi in Winnipeg.
Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to Winnipeg, but I'd rather be in Nashville or Vegas than Minneapolis. So, like,
Tom,
it's not like a contest, really.
Tom, don't put Murat in a tough spot here. He's about to work a series with Russo.
Yeah, I'm listening to this. I'm going to meet Michael Russo in just a few short days here, and now you're giving me all this ammunition to go at him with.
Tell him only the best about us.
I want a press box fight. That's what I want. I want to throw him down in the press box.
Actually,
Nope.
I'll give you a pointer when you meet Russo. Just share your displeasure with the Twitter account called Russo Slacks with him, and he'll love you.
Be like, so what's up with this slacks thing? Like, somebody really likes your pants?
No, you should say you love it. You're like, well, you know what's really clever? Russo Slacks.
I need all of this in writing afterwards too, and notes and specific
we
references.
Can do that. We can debrief you. Yeah.
We'll send you some tips on how to and how not to anger the great Russo. But,
we've definitely done both. We've been on both sides of that coin
in
the last
alone.
week. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Well, hey, he can't wait. He can't fight with me is the last thing I'll say on this topic because he's going to need me to figure out the Wi-Fi ritual anyway.
That's true. That's very true. I think the last time he was up there, he was battling some Wi-Fi issues. So, moving into the playoff series that we have at hand, the Minnesota Wild and the Winnipeg Jets getting their first ever playoff meeting. Murat here helping us look at the Winnipeg Jets. And first question I have is, really kind of through the month of March, the Jets had players going in and out of the lineup with injuries. Are they clear of that injury bug, or are they still battling some a little bit?
The key ones seem to have sorted themselves out. Mark Scheifele is healthy and back up to full speed. Laine went out with, missed part of a game with just a rocket of a shot block that went off his foot. He came back. He seems to be skating well. Jacob Trouba, he tweaked something in his ankle just at practice a couple of days ago, a collision with Brandon Tanev. And he sat out last night, but he'll be back and ready for Wednesday. So it looks like a relatively full health. We'll still likely be, or Winnipeg will still likely be without Enstrom and Kulikov. Enstrom's a little bit more likely to play than Kulikov on the left side defense. But really, the key guys are in the key places, especially if Enstrom is back. And I've been looking at that Suter injury and wondering how things shake out for you guys.
No kidding.
Yeah, you talk about left side defense injuries, and the Wild have the almighty left side defense injury with no Ryan Suter in the postseason at all, as he's not even going to be able to walk for another 4 months at least.
I mean, Russo's point that, we always say we're cursed here, right? But this injury, they were saying in any other sport, he'd probably be just done, right?
Yeah, right.
And it's like, I think there's a point here. Like, how did this happen?
Well, I mean, the play looked kind of innocuous. Like, it looked like it was you could see how someone could get an injury off it. But you don't imagine that looked like a steamroller ran over Ryan Suter's foot in that play. Like, that's not what you get out of that play. But yeah, it's just, it's just added on to the ever-growing list of Minnesota sports lore, But yeah, I think, I don't know, is the Winnipeg faithful, or are they excited? I mean, not excited, I guess, but are they a little more hopeful with the Suter injury? Like, does that see does that ease their minds a little bit as far as having success in the series, do you think?
I suspect it should. I haven't seen too much on social media, just from the fans that follow me, that focus on Suter so far. But I think as soon as the schedule's just been more or less announced and will be confirmed later today, I think in the next couple of days people will be looking at that and really sort of getting jacked up about it, because few teams are better at protecting in front of the net than the Minnesota Wild are, and I can only imagine Suter's a big part of that. And Winnipeg's offense comes from the center slot; it comes from penetrating those areas, and that's one guy that Winnipeg. Oh, let me tell you something. Like when Scheifele was out, Lowry was out, Trouba was out, we had this running joke in Winnipeg that it was kind of like the Simpsons episode with the baseball players, and everybody important was just like
Homer up to
lost
bat
in the weirdest ways. So maybe that luck has changed, and maybe that's happening to Minnesota right now, and I think Winnipeg's fortunate for it.
Sir, Roger Clemens is in no condition to pitch. So talk about the Wild defense being really good at cleaning out in front of the net, and they will be without Ryan Suter, but the defense has carried on here, seemingly pretty decent, give or take here in the game since. But you look at the Winnipeg lineup, and up front at forward they have incredible scoring depth, and as I said on a radio show on Saturday, the Jets this year remind me a lot of what the Wild were last year with scoring depth, except the Jets have a lot more high-end talent with Laine and Wheeler. Just how good are the Jets up front?
I think that I can't think of another team that really goes as deep with the top-end talent. Maybe in terms of Pittsburgh or Tampa Bay, but in the Western Conference, I think the depth of the top end talent is kind of unmatched in Winnipeg, and that's their calling card right now. When they came up to the city from Atlanta, the big question was, where's the top end talent going to come from? Because at that time it was Ladd, Little, and Wheeler, and they could really drive it 5-on-5, but that explosive side was gone. Well, now you've got more than 40 goals from Patrick Laine, 31 from Kyle Connor, and 30 from Nick Ehlers, and all this young talent in addition to the guys that are driving play. When your third line, or at least in name sometimes, is Stastny, Laine, and Ehlers, you're doing pretty well. And the fourth one can play too. It's a checking line by name, but it's not like a lot of times in the NHL these days, the checking line, that name comes when a few guys just simply don't score, but they might not just be good at other things. In the case
familiar.
of Lowry, Kopp, and Tanev, they actually control where the play is. Like they can play against Giroux or Stamkos and keep them in their own zone. So those four lines, it's definitely a Winnipeg strength.
And if you count Paul Stastny's season total with both the Blues and the Jets, the Jets have 8 forwards with at least 39 or more points, and then you got Blake Wheeler at the top there with 91, and Laine with 44 goals. And I mean, if you're a Wild fan and you now see Ryan Suter out for the postseason, you're probably going to be stocking up on your beverage of choice for the postseason.
The one difference maker, though, I'm sorry if I'm cutting off the question that might lead to this, but Devan Dubnyk can go off in a way that few other goaltenders can. And I think I do look at Minnesota as a kind of not really like an incredibly huge underdog. Certainly I see it that they are a little bit of one, but with Dubnyk in net, sometimes, anything can happen.
Is the feeling in Winnipeg that, like, finally there's a contender here? We've heard about all the young players and kind of what they can be, or are they in a honeymoon phase and this is just kind of, just a bonus, I guess, for the fan base?
You know what? I've actually been trying to control that conversation because earlier on in the season there was a bit of a honeymoon to it, and simply, just getting used to the idea that the city had a top-tier team. Especially they didn't make the playoffs last year, and there's a lot of questions about how or why that came to be, and a lot of those things were addressed over the year. But the big thing is this team is going to be good for a very long time if and only if they can manage the cap situation. And they've still got Ehlers and Laine on entry-level contracts, same with Connor, Morrissey. Trouba's contract is cheap. In terms of how much value they get from the guys on their team, it's never going to be as good as it is right now. and then a little bit next season as well. And then after that, Laine's contract kicks in, and who knows what comes of it.
Right.
So the attitude has been fairly like, this is new and wonderful, but I think this is a unique opportunity in the city, and hopefully they realize it quite soon.
You mentioned Devin Dubnyk as having potential to perhaps make or break this series for the Minnesota Wild. You look on the opposite side, the Jets have Connor Hellebuck, who, if we remember the beginning of the year, it looked like he was more going to be a backup or more share time with Mason in goal. And, well, not a great start from Mason, and I believe he got hurt early on, and Connor Hellebuck took the goal, and he never really let up, but he had set a record for wins by an American goaltender in a season this year. And something I did bring up on Saturday as well was, you look, he started 67 or 68 games this year. Is there maybe a concern that Hellebuck might be a little bit out of gas with starting such a high volume of games this year? Or is everything seemingly, all signs are good on that front?
Yeah, you know what? If anything bad happens, if any garbage goal or one that he wants back beats him, I'm sure that the outrage and the uproar is going to be about how many games he's played. That said, if you look at his save percentage like month by month, there really isn't a drop off. And I've talked to him a little bit about this in terms of how he manages his game day rhythm and routines. And I've talked to Paul Maurice a little bit about it as well. And he has played a lot of games, but the Jets' attitude seems to be, in February, there was this 10-game homestand with games well spread out from each other. And as long as he's in a rhythm that he feels all right with, I don't look at him as a guy that's overworked. Like over the past month, he's still rocking a 929 save percentage, and he's getting the job done all the way through. It'll be a fun story if something happens, and you can blame it on fatigue, but I don't see it in the numbers.
Are you concerned at all about his lack of experience with the playoffs? I mean, I think that's something that people bring up, but I don't know if that's a real thing. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that a goalie's not a good playoff goalie until he plays there, but is that a concern at all about Hellebuck?
I think it would be fair for people who put stock in that. I don't see a way to make a real strong prediction on it. So I don't know. If you cherry pick throughout history, you can find rookie playoff goaltenders, if you want to use that phrase, that just excel and dominate and crush it. And then you can find ones that had rough times of it as well. So I don't know that there's a guarantee, but he has strong career numbers, even if last year, was bad. There was, on the site, on The Athletic, I was predicting that he'd bounce back to some extent. I'm not sure that I went this high with him. There's a lot of reasons to think he's a very, very good goaltender. And I don't see, while anything can happen in 4, 5, 6, or 7 games, I don't see a reason to really put too much doubt on the guy.
Yeah, I mean, just for Wild fans, Jake Allen had very little playoff experience going into last season. And
he did all right.
He did just fine.
He did okay. Yeah, and to your point, I'm looking at Hellebuck's stats here, and he's, in March he had a 931 save percentage, in April was 930. So he's really not slowing down, and those are numbers that are going to bode very well for the postseason. Dubnyk, whereas, we're used to him being on kind of a roller coaster, but he actually, I cited this in April, he had a it's down to probably like 950 or 940 save percentage in April, but he's also hot as well. So it's entirely possible. We talk a lot about the depth of scoring and the defense for Minnesota, and as we've mentioned before, the goalies are probably going to decide the series anyway. So,
yeah, they well might. And then the other X factor is coaching. And the last time that Winnipeg made the Stanley Cup playoffs, they got swept in 4 games to the Anaheim Ducks, coached by Bruce Boudreau. And there's a sentiment in Winnipeg that, when it comes to the gamesmanship of playoffs, that maybe Boudreau's got something on Maurice. I don't know, but certainly Boudreau's had better teams and more playoff experience and success. So that's actually something that a lot of the fans that I've been talking to have been a little bit concerned about.
How do you feel about that series? We've cited it as the best the best 4-game sweep that was ever played, because I felt like Winnipeg, I mean, that was an incredible series, right? Like, that was a great 4 games, and usually you don't look at 4-game sweeps as being good series at all. But that was a series where, I mean, it was, I think it was 3 overtime games out of 4, I believe, and it was just an incredibly entertaining series, albeit, again, like you said, the 4-game sweep for the Ducks. Is that how it's perceived locally for you guys, or is it just kind of, is there some sour grapes about it?
I've come across both reactions. I've come across they carried play for stretches and overtimes and et cetera, and I've also come across folks that believe that Pavlik was a bit of a paper tiger in terms of a goalie, and his season wasn't really representative of how good he really was. And so in hindsight, there's been a lot of criticism directed at that team. I don't know what to make of it. That was before my time on the beat, but I have every reason to believe, and I think everyone across the NHL has every reason to believe that this year's Jets are so much better than that version.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So I think for the Wild, they'd rather play Vegas or Nashville, right? Just in terms of the matchup and how they played them in the regular season. For sure, Vegas.
For
right?
sure, for sure, the regular season, and then they did have a thing on Nashville. I know Giles has flip flopped on this, but I think it was it was a little bit of a coin flip between Nashville and Winnipeg, because Nashville's really good.
Right, and I don't want to discount
but
that.
the Wild did kind of take it to them a little bit this season, and that definitely wasn't the case with Winnipeg.
But my thought here is for the NHL, they'd rather have this matchup, right? Because this is 2 cities that are, 7 hours apart?
And it just completely...
Depends how you're driving.
Yeah.
Fair.
and the series just totally plays into why they made the playoffs like this,
Yes.
which now most people don't like, is that, they wanted to create rivalries, and this one may as well just take right off after this, and the NHL will point right to it.
But at the same time, this series, I get what you're saying, Tom, but this series, does the NHL really care about a rivalry between the Wild and the Jets? No, I don't think they care.
Yeah.
They created this so, the
TV
Blues and the
ratings say
Blackhawks would have rivalries.
Right,
they created
or
this so,
Minnesota, Chicago.
So, it would amp up the Anaheim, Los Angeles rivalry. I do think it's a positive, and definitely for people in the state of Minnesota and up in Winnipeg, it's obviously a positive, but I don't think the NHL really cares.
Up in Winnipeg, how are the Wild viewed? Is that a team they hate, or are they pretty meh on it?
I don't feel the hatred to look around and to talk to people and do the interactions on Twitter. I don't see the hatred yet, but maybe a week from now it'll be a whole lot different.
I think they seriously can mitigate home ice advantage for the Wild, because every time you go to games there, there's tons of Winnipeg fans.
Yeah.
Yep, they will travel very well.
Yeah, it's a close.
Kind of getting back to the Jets on the ice here, Ed, you look at the defense. You mentioned there's a couple of injuries there on the blue line. Is that kind of the one area of weakness you see on the Jets where the Wild could maybe exploit? Is their defense?
Yeah, especially depending on the permutations we see. So Morrissey and Trouba, I'm expecting full health from those guys. Like I said, Trouba tweaked something in his ankle, but I think he'll be fine to go, or at least as playoff quality fine in terms of health. So they're the real deal. Morrissey and Trouba, they move the puck out of their zone really well, physical enough, offensive talent in both of them as well. I don't see problems there. The second pairing through most of the year has been Bufflin and Toby Enstrom, and they've been excellent. In terms, nobody moves the puck out of their own zone quicker or better or more efficiently than those two guys. The problem is Enstrom keeps hurting himself, and the downgrade from him to Chirot or Morrow or some of the other possibilities make that a possible spot of weakness. And then the third pairing, the way that I see it, Tyler Myers is on the right side, and then it's going to be one of Chirot or Morrow, or depending on how the injuries shake out. And that's the one where, even though Tyler Myers has some serious offensive game, he gets lost very easily in his own zone, especially against moving coverage. Just last night, he had a play where he broke his stick and couldn't make up his mind about whether he was going to go to the wall to chase down a puck or cover the front of the net. And he ended up just sort of staying in a no man's land for a solid 5-6 seconds, and it led to a chance. So I rate him highly in the offensive zone, but that third pairing is going to be pretty ripe. If you can get the matchup game and stay in Winnipeg's zone, that's the one that I think that there could be problems with.
And the other thing I kind of have here for you is, we talked about the who on the Wild, and from a forward perspective and a defensive perspective, we kind of need to step up in this series. From a Jets standpoint, is there one forward and one defenseman you're kind of looking at as, they need to kind of bring their best here in this series for the Jets to have a really good chance to win? Obviously, we'd cite goaltenders, but we pretty well drive that into the ground on this podcast that goaltending is going to win you just about any playoff series.
Yeah, playoffs are really, storytelling-wise, it's a bit of a magical time because anybody can be the one who scores the goal that makes the impact. But I'm a huge believer in the fact that stars win hockey games and stars win championships in the long run. So I think the trick for Winnipeg, if I can name one forward, is just that Blake Wheeler is Blake Wheeler. And if he can carry the play up the ice and be that annoying as hell guy to play against, a strong forechecker with tremendous offensive ability as well. If he can get into the middle as much as he's done throughout the season, things are going to go well for Winnipeg. And then on the back end, I'll go with Dustin Byfuglien, who has had a lot of critics this season in the first half when the points weren't going in, but his defensive game was quite strong. And in the back half, the points started to pile up as well. He's got some hometown connections in the area too, if I've got that straight. And maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that with Winnipeg's first pairing kind of set, Byfuglien is going to have a huge responsibility anchoring the second one, and he's going to be a very important player.
I was going to say, it would be so Minnesota sports if Blake Wheeler and Dustin Byfuglien were
it's gonna happen.
backbreakers.
It's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't even realize that theme I was painting as I was going there, but I mean it sincerely. Yeah, those guys could be the difference makers.
And you mentioned, stars win you playoff series and win Stanley Cups, and I think the Wild have had a front seat view to that in just about every playoff series they've played, where they've played the Blackhawks X amount of times. Patrick Kane, always a backbreaker in that series. When they've played the Blues, Vladimir Tarasenko has absolutely lit them up. And then the one year they played the Stars, it was Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin just taking it to them. So we can definitely relate to Stars need to win you series, and Winnipeg certainly does have that, and that's definitely something to expect here in this series.
Yeah, though speaking of Stars, if I can just ask for what your opinion is on Eric Stahl's 42 goals.
Well, every week on this podcast, we try to not,
talk about him the entire time.
Yeah, go, man, Eric Stahl is really great, get all googly-eyed, but we do anyway. And, doing this at the age of 33 is quite something. And you certainly hope his 42 goals and great play carries into the postseason. But
I think he was a big loss. What game did he go out against?
It was Game 5 last year. He only missed 2 periods.
Yeah. But I mean, think about it. That injury could have affected this season, right? It looked bad enough.
Could have had
Very
a Crosby
fortunately
type deal,
And not only that, but looking at Stars, I mean, Granlund had essentially the same point total as he had 67, 69. Zucker had 33 goals. I mean, there's certain guys there that maybe can become stars, I guess. In Stahl's case, he's proving he can do it in the playoffs, and with the young guys, it's, is this something that can improve upon going forward?
Yeah.
Just a few more questions here for our guest, Murat Atesh from the Winnipeg Athletic. Do you, I guess, have, maybe besides Eric Stahl, is there a player or two on the Wild that really kind of jump out at you as, the Jets have to kind of make sure they control this player in this series?
I think that Winnipeg is so superlatively good that it will be a matter, and I criticize them heartily when the time comes. But I'll say that I think that Winnipeg should be able to roll 4 lines and have success with that, just because of how deep they are. I do have, historically, I've had a lot of respect for Mikko Koivu's game and his ability to control play against good players. there might be a guy like that, and you can comment if he's still doing it this season to that high level. But there might be players who can sort of neutralize Winnipeg's potent offense a little bit more, that will become a little bit more prominent as the series go on. But hopefully I can politely say that I think Winnipeg's offensive players are just that strong.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that. Koivu has had kind of a quietly, decent season where he hasn't put up the point totals he put up last year. But he's certainly, I think, even with slowing down a little bit, I think he's played every bit of that defensive game. There's an article recently from someone about, kind of advocating him for the Selke.
Sportsnet, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was, it's just that's how good he is defensively, kind of on a day in and day out basis, even though he certainly doesn't provide the offense that a lot of folks around here.
The contract, I'm speaking personally, but I feel like that's also something that he's locked in for 2 more years at a pretty hefty price.
He took a pay cut. Come
on. Last 2 questions before Tom takes us down a terrible rabbit hole. For Murat, these are our 2 questions here we'd love to ask all of our guests. First of which is Ben and I, huge hockey jersey fans / critics. So we love to ask everyone what is their favorite hockey jersey of all time, or if you're like us and certainly cannot narrow that down to just one, do you have a Mount Rushmore of hockey jerseys?
That's a great question. I sincerely think that there's been no jersey ever better designed than the Hartford Whalers.
That's fair. That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Color scheme, HW, whale tail. I think it has everything. And if when I walk into the shops and see those ones, I usually gravitate towards them.
Is the Jets alternate that kind of look like the Solani Jets? You know what I'm talking about? I think that was last season. Didn't they have something like that?
They wore the Solani that era. I mean,
yeah. I mean, but do you like the revamped ones?
Like their current jerseys?
I'll pull it up for you guys.
Yeah, what do you think about the retro versus the current Jets attire?
For me, I prefer the retro Jets jerseys, and that could be nostalgia, but I find them to be just so, like, especially when they bust them out as thirds, or just practice jerseys or what have you. The new one has some like military significance and some symbolism and things like that in there. The old one, to me, just looks like the hockey I grew up on, and for me, I would have hoped that they find ways to honor that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've mentioned that too with the third jersey program probably kicking back up next season. You would hope that they maybe would homage that somehow.
Yeah, it was I think the one Tom was referencing was the jersey they wore in the Heritage Classic. I believe that was last year.
Yeah, it's like their WHA jersey.
Yeah, which again, we've said it before, is a very good look. And although I guess I don't know, but do Arizona Coyotes fans get really heated when the Jets rip out the retro jerseys like
Houston
Dallas
anyways?
does?
Get out of here.
Yeah. There's Yotes fans? What?
Oh boy. Okay, last question for Murat Atesh, Winnipeg Athletic. And this is a little bit off the board. This will probably catch you off guard, but Ben and I do love a spirited food debate on this podcast, and it originated with this question on soup. Do you believe soup to be a meal, or is soup more of a side to you?
So this will only make sense to a small portion of your listeners, or that's my guess anyway. But I grew up with some close friends of the Mennonite tradition, including some mutual friends that Giles and I have. And few people do soup as a meal better than the Mennonites of rural Manitoba. And if not for them, I would be saying it couldn't possibly be a meal. It's too light. What's going to fill me up? But after that cultural experience, I'm got to say that it is in fact a veritable meal.
Oh, jeez.
Well, that is good news for me, who definitely takes that side on this show. And you joined the likes of Sarah McClellan, who did a couple weeks ago, and also Craig Custance, who just straight took a sledgehammer to the soup haters.
Oh, he went hot.
Yeah, he was offended by that question. Like, that's how passionate he was about it. He was like, "Are you kidding me?"
He torched poor Ben.
Yeah, I didn't even stand a chance. National writer just lit me up on my own podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get Craig riled up, just ask him about soup, and there he goes. Murat,
how about, do you have answers for Michael Russo? That's actually one thing I got to know.
No, he doesn't like us enough
we
to
gotta get him on to ask the almighty soup question, and so we haven't gotten there yet, but hopefully one day down the line here. Murat, before we let you go, is there anything you'd love to plug?
Yeah, at the Athletic, the most bragging that I could do is that I wrote a penalty kill piece about the Winnipeg Jets that was so in depth. No, that's too much bragging. Actually, after I wrote this particular piece, I received word that I'd be receiving vaguer answers from Jets staff and coaching. So I'm going to be taking some video to Minnesota's power play and penalty kill in advance of the series that is, and all of our stuff for the Jets is going to be tagged wild as well. So I'll plug the fact that our coverage is just about to kick it to the next level in time for playoffs.
I was going to say that is the advantage of the Athletic, is that their guys can read Russo and we can, read this.
And I was going to say also on Murat's coverage here, I read a good piece on Nikolai Ehlers, and I think it had quotes from like his dad and his brother and all that. And that was a very good read. Although I did not care for Nick's personal Premier League team choice, but his brother was doing really good with going with Liverpool. So, where can people find you on Twitter?
Twitter, I'm at WPG Murat, which is MURAT. WPG MURAT. I claim to be the only Murat in Winnipeg.
Murat, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely have you back on again down the line here.
Thanks very much for having me, guys.
Thanks to Murat Atesh for joining us. Certainly a fun interview with him, and again, you can find his work on the Athletic, and he'll be working alongside with the great Michael Russo, and Pierre LeBrun is getting in on the action for the Wild and Jets. Usually he gets his choice of going somewhere, and he usually picks out west in the lovely California sun, but apparently, unlike San Jose, he thinks that Winnipeg is the better pick here.
I think the interesting thing, going back to what I said in the interview, it'd be a little hard to read the coverage. For example, they played, Anaheim, LA, San Jose. It'd be hard to. I think the Athletics in all those markets. I'd have to look again, but it's got to be there in LA. Yeah,
they've pretty much got every big market.
Seattle, Tampa now and stuff.
I read something where they are expanding to all markets, but they're not quite in all markets. I think they're in 20.
So,
Regardless, I
don't think Athletic Phoenix is popping up anytime soon.
No. I mean, Tampa was an interesting one, but I'll keep that off wax. But the point I'm making here is they will be doing a lot of playoff previews, so it's not like you're just reading a gamer from the night before or something too in-depth that you don't really, unless you're a hockey nut, you're not interested in going that deep with, let's say, the Sharks, right? So I think this is it'll be cool just to kind of see how Winnipeg responds to Russo. I'm sure there'll be some Twitter chatter there, and kind of then from our perspective, seeing what do we think? What do people in Winnipeg think of, and how are they covered in the information that they provide?
When he meets Russo, I hope the first thing he asks is, "Mike, can I get your stance on soup?"
that, and the second question, slacks. Yeah.
I should almost just send him a message. Sorry in advance.
Yeah, I didn't mean to. Oh, okay, we did though.
But okay. So now we've kind of looked at the Wild perspective, we've looked at the Jets perspective, and now it's time to go on the Giles and the goalie record.
Oh boy.
And say who is going to win this series. I'll start with Tom.
Oh, I think Winnipeg has this in 5. I think the way it'll go, I mean, I'm just being serious. I think the Wild are going to look overwhelmed in Winnipeg. That's a loud building. That's a team that can score. Mm-hmm. I think outside Dubnyk really standing on his head, they don't stand a chance there. I think everyone knows Game 3 is pivotal, and I think that's when either someone steps up and one of the a Zucker or whatever, a Prezi steps up, or Dubnyk steals that for you, but it always seems like teams can hold on the fort in that game 3 if they're the one that's returning home. Outside of that, I mean, I think it ends game 5 in Winnipeg. It's a tough matchup for the Wild, and then I think there's serious questions in the offseason of, did you just run into another brick wall, right? Did you run into, aside from the Jake Allen Blues, right? Like, is this your next Chicago?
Yeah.
And I think that's a serious question.
Very fair.
Yeah.
Before we get to Ben's prediction, I just want to say, like, you look at this series and the expectations, like, what does Chuck Fletcher get a pass on this? Like say, or does the series have to go a certain length for Chuck Fletcher to get a pass on this? Say the Wild go in 4, Tom said in 5. Like, do you think it didn't matter anyway that Suter was out? So maybe a time for a change, or 6
this
or
is
7.
unfair. This
Keep
is
him.
unfair for Chuck Fletcher. You like this matchup better because what if you are you playing Vegas?
Yeah.
Your boy Holla and Tuck
mop the floor with him.
right?
And,
And then I think there's more pressure on him, right?
yeah, I think you're right.
So I think in this case, there's pressure on him. The problem is it's a weird pressure. It's this kind of he can rely on. Well, you can't see the future. You don't know if Winnipeg's always going to be in our way, right? I think if you're Fletcher and he is allowed to have a platform after this, that's the angle he's going to take. And he'd be like, man, we had a great season. Look, we just lost 2 of our best defensemen. We had to go through the expansion draft if he wants to bring that up. And that Niederreiter, I think you can reveal the Niederreiter injury and be like, hey, look, he did all right considering this. And I think he has enough excuses. I don't know if that pleases the fan base, but it certainly seems like ownership is patient with him and would hear him out on him.
No, I think you're right. I think it does matter how this series goes. I think if they are blown out of the water, I think you probably see the axe, even with those excuses built in.
Yeah.
Well, because it's like
I think that if they're blowing up, but I think if they push Winnipeg to 7 and they lose in overtime, and then you get the shucks, we'll get them next time.
A sweep
without our defensemen and that kind of stuff.
A sweep where it ends in St. Paul. Is really tough.
Yeah.
That may be one where literally someone in a pitchfork just walked off.
His body's thrown onto the center ice after the game, from the owner's suite. Yeah, I think you're right though. I think that, and we've said this all season long because, oh God, how long have we gotten the Chuck Fletcher hot seat question? It's a bad inside joke there. Anyway, so I think that we've always said. Yeah, I think if he wins the series, he's probably going to keep his job. But I think if they either miss the playoffs or are out in the first round, he's probably going to lose his job. Like there's a little bit of gray area there, and I think a long, hotly contested series with with Winnipeg is that gray area.
So what about this? And I apologize if I'm cutting you off here, but
No.
one of the kind of saving graces for Fletcher is that it was really hard to fire a GM right before an expansion draft, right?
Sure.
That there's just a lot of, not only do you have to learn the team, but you have to know the nuances of that. Mm-hmm. And Seattle's coming in next year. Is that right?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years?
2020.
Okay, so actually now would be the time to fire him so that you have a GM. Yeah, that's interesting because I think
And his contract's up.
Yeah, I think it's a really easy. Yeah,
But
I think he's gone. By the way, if 5 or 4, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
Chuckles
I would agree with that.
what are you predicting out of this series?
I would love to be optimistic, but I would say Winnipeg in 6, and maybe that's optimistic. It just, without Suter, it gets really tough to, I think, exploit some of their weaknesses, and you don't know what you have Spurgeon at, and that's another one, too, that I think people are like, oh, Spurgeon's back, great, yay, it's going to be great. If he's back at 70-80%, I mean, he's a great defender, but he's still not that elite guy if he's at 70-80%. So
let me just throw this out there. What if Winnipeg scores 2 quick goals at home? The place it's going nuts, right? Mm-hmm. And you call a timeout. Think of all the implications that come out of that timeout. Do you switch out Dubnyk? Then what do you do with game 2?
No.
Right? I mean, so you ride ride Dubnyk even if it's like a 5-0 loss.
See, here's the thing with...
Well, you pull him at some point, but
Yeah.
I don't think you come close to putting Stalock in a game where you think you want to win.
Yeah.
If this was 2 years ago, I would think that's an interesting take, but the complexity of calling a timeout now in the National Hockey League has changed so much
Because of
with reviews.
Yeah.
If you call a timeout, you get rid of your review, and if you do that early in the game, then you're kind of...
Winnipeg scores 3
yourself.
games where
Right.
3 goals where they're offside.
But
Minnesota fans wouldn't react poorly to that at all. That certainly wouldn't piss anybody off. No referees would be clocked with whiskey bottles over that. That's for sure.
Some guy in San Francisco, some Twitter employees, like, we're shutting it off in the Twin Cities area. Shut it off.
Just flip the switch. I'm going to say Winnipeg in 6 because I think that the Wild have enough to maybe drag it out and maybe miraculously win a home game or even both home games. But and I think, conversely, I think it's probably just as or more likely I would say Winnipeg in 5, just because I think winning both of those home games against Winnipeg is going to be hard. But if the Wild do win this series, it's going to be in 7. There's no way that unless Dubnyk is like Hasek era 1998, I just don't see them winning this series in anything less than 7 games.
If Winnipeg loses Game 5 and it comes back to St. Paul 3-2, that's actually scary for Winnipeg because you got to imagine it's tough Game 6 there, and then Dubnyk could screw you in Game 7 or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Stands on it. There's so much riding on him, and that's just such not where you want to be as a hockey team.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say. I mean, I'm going to be optimistically giving Winnipeg in 6. I'm more on Tom's side where I'm like Winnipeg in 5.5. Like that would be my over under would be 5.5 games, and I would be like.
It feels like Chicago years ago when they played them in 5 and Zucker scored in overtime. I think that was in Game 3. Like, it's weird that the Wild are at that stage and like where you'd be like, man, you're back there where you're like trying to squeak one game out just for pride, like
that they're still the same team 4 years later,
or that they're in a similar situation where you're like, oh, this is New Chicago, great,
so
pretty much.
This is the 6th straight year the Minnesota Wild have made the playoffs in the Chuck Fletcher era, or the Zach Parise, Ryan Suter era. Sure. Ever since those guys have shown up, they've been in the playoffs every year since. And just one series out of the 7 that they have previously played, the Wild have not started in an 0-2 hole in that series.
Wow.
And this is not the one that's going to. I know that,
and that is a trend that. We are giving a 98.4% odds of saying we'll go right through again.
Pretty much.
Sorry, Tom, I made a Gophers reference. Please don't drive home another joke on Drew. That poor kid.
He's doing fine. We're toughing him up.
Thick skin.
So,
grow some thick skin.
The Wild fall in an 0-2 hole, and it was pointed out by Michael Russo. I don't see the Wild stealing one in Winnipeg. It would have to take an otherworldly performance by Devin Dubnyk for the Wild to steal one out of Winnipeg and bring the series back just tied at 1 at least. Unless Dubnyk goes full Jake Allen, just brick wall, and
that's what
the Wild claw their way into a 2-0 advantage coming back to say, which is not happening. But the Wild falling in an 0-2 hole is just about the worst thing, and they'll probably win Game 3 like they typically do, but I'm with Tom. I see this as a Jets in 5. Yeah. Just, and as we said, like, the defense is, can go either way, and goaltending can go either way, but the forwards just for the Jets are just so good, and they are going to come at you on 4 lines. It just kills the Wild in this series. It'll be Jets in 5, and I say that very begrudgingly as he takes a drink out of his whiskey glass.
I think it's important to note the Wild have never beaten a team like decidedly more talented than them. When they beat the Avalanche in the first round, that was the smoke and mirrors, Patrick Roy Avalanche. And same thing with St. Louis. St. Louis wasn't more talented than them. They had Tarasenko, but they weren't more talented than the Wild.
It literally came down to what Murat said was stars win you series and Stanley Cups,
absolutely.
Which the Wild have fringe stars. They don't have bona fide superstars in the league.
Honestly, we'll look back at the Chuck Fletcher era and go, he had 2 very expensive players that are. It's great to have a great 2-way forward. Well, actually, Zach Parise looks better than I thought he would be.
Yeah.
I thought the back would be more of an issue.
We
thought he'd be amnestied, right? And that's still maybe on the table, but
I still would.
Yeah. But I'm just saying it's not as guaranteed as before.
It's not like
And Suter, we know how important he is, even at his age, given this injury. However, they never had a Tarasenko, never had a Anze Kopitar or something
Kirill
like that.
Kaprizov.
Yeah.
We really incredibly
Kirill Kaprizov If he ever comes here,
Okay, everyone,
it's not going to be the Russia. He's going to be like, you know what? It's not great in Russia, but there's so much pressure here, right? I mean, like, it would be unbelievable.
Before we kind of move on from it, like, we never really brought up Zach Parise and kind of maybe another player that kind of highlight.
I thought about
because
he's
been on
usually good in
fire since March,
and he's usually good in the playoffs.
Yeah.
He actually shows up.
This is what he's getting paid for.
He needs the grinded out garbage goal guy in the playoffs, and that's
absolutely.
That's
I mean, I think I was at I think it was the last Predators home game here. First of all, decent showing for Nashville, which I was always a little surprised. It's not like a convenient trip, but the other thing is they played cutesy in the first period, kind of took it off, like didn't look great. I thought the Predators should have been up 5-0, and then they started getting greasy goals in the second and third period. And if they want to win in the playoffs, they got to get those greasy goals. It's not going to be pretty.
Speaking of the rest of the NHL playoffs, with the President's Trophy winning Nashville Predators, quickly to just rifle off the other series we have to wrap up the show. We are doing a bracket challenge here in the Giles and the Goalie podcast. You go to bracketchallenge.nhl.com, find Giles and the Goalie, or we'll tweet out the link to it from our Twitter account or on our Facebook, whatever. Password is Jerseys, capital J, to join this group. Please make sure your entry has your Twitter handle. That is of utmost importance, or if you don't have a Twitter handle, shoot us a message and we'll figure it out if you win prizes. But we are going to have some prizes to give away, one of which is an Alex Stalock bobblehead, courtesy of the Iowa Wild. Probably our fans up in Duluth would probably take more interest in that. But the bracket challenge, obviously picking all the playoff series and how they're going to fare out. So to start, we'll start in the East. We are recording on Sunday before the Boston Bruins-Florida Panthers game, so we don't know the full Eastern Conference playoff picture, so we'll kind of make vague predictions on East. But quickly to rifle through, we got the Washington Capitals and the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Metro Division champ Washington Capitals. Who are you picking?
I would take the Capitals because it's a first-round matchup.
Capitals, pretty handily.
Yeah.
Columbus has never won a playoff game, right?
Series. They've won games,
okay.
but they've never won a series.
It's going to be this is really close because Columbus has been setting the world on fire since the trade deadline when they acquired one Tom Vanek.
Yeah.
Woo! But the Capitals seemingly have done it again. They've done it quietly. They won the Metro Division. They won the President's Trophy this year, but they put together a good regular season. Not sure who the starting goaltender is going to be between Holtby or Grubauer because Grubauer has been playing otherworldly.
It'll be Holtby.
So that'll be interesting to see, but I think this goes to 7, and Washington wins a rare Game 7 over the Columbus Blue Jackets. Next in the Metro Division, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Pittsburgh, home ice advantage. And is anyone going with Philly in this series?
No, but I think it'll be fun to watch, right? There'll be some bad blood and stuff. Yeah,
it'll get nasty.
It'll be. I hope it's like that one from like 7 years ago when it was Fleury and Brizgalov, and it was it was like 7-6 every game.
What is Briz chilling with like Kirill right now? Where is he at?
No, he's at home, probably in a bar somewhere.
He's counting
brushing up on politics,
chilling with Chad Graff.
Okay, so we have a couple of ifs. So we have. If the Tampa Bay Lightning are the Atlantic Division champions, which would involve the Florida Panthers defeating the Boston Bruins, they would play the New Jersey Devils. So in a series that could be Tampa Bay and New Jersey, would we all pick Tampa Bay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think New Jersey is lucky to be there.
What if it goes the other way and it was Boston versus New Jersey? Everybody picks Boston?
Yeah. I don't think New Jersey makes it out of the first round of the playoffs.
And then you look at it on the flip side, should the Boston Bruins win the Atlantic Division, Tampa Bay would slot in play Toronto, which would be the juggernaut series of the first round. Either way, it will be the juggernaut series of the first round, no matter if it's Tampa Bay or Boston. But say it's Tampa Bay, Toronto, who's everyone taking?
I take Tampa Bay, but I think it's fun.
I'm kind of with you there. I lean towards Tampa Bay, but man, Toronto totally
Tampa
could win
Bay,
the series.
I'm going Toronto.
Yeah,
And
I think that's fair.
Tampa Bay has kind of slid for me, and I've really when Andre Vasilevsky is saying on the record he's tired, that's a major red flag.
The other right, and I think the other thing is that the wave starts then, right? If they win a series, all of a sudden people are like they're taking over the league and all this stuff.
At the beginning of the year on ZoneCoverage.com, I did pick the East Final to be Pittsburgh and Toronto, with the Toronto Maple Leafs coming out. So I'm probably going to stick to that in my bracket challenge. And then Boston, Toronto, I
think Boston. I would, because Boston's red hot. Obviously, I would take Boston in that series, but I think it would be close too. Not as close as Tampa, Toronto, but I think Boston could win that series. It would be fun though, like you said.
I think I choose Toronto just because I want that to happen.
Yeah,
I think that's a heart pick, but
that's fair.
I'm with Tom. I'm going to take Toronto again. Austin Matthews had a really quiet regular season, and I think he's going to have a big coming out party in this postseason. So, switching over to the West, in the Pacific Division, the Vegas Golden Knights matching up against the Los Angeles Kings. Who are we taking?
Kings. I think the Kings have enough pieces that have been there before that are pivotal to their team. Vegas, I'm just curious kind of what this... It's been fun. It's been a good run. Yeah. But what they actually do in the playoffs.
It's kind of an interesting, old warhorse goalie matchup to me with Quick and Fleury. I think I would have predicted... it's very easy, I think, to predict Vegas to kind of fall on their face because... they're a good team. I'm not saying they're not, but they're a little smoke and mirrors too.
The other thing, kind of like this Winnipeg, Minnesota thing, I know that they're not supposed to sell their tickets to outsiders and all this, but it is a 4-hour drive, right? People live in LA to go to Vegas.
They got the Knights Vow. The Knights Vow is gonna
just the King's rank above the Knights. Think about it. Medieval times. Lord of the Rings, baby.
Right. No, I'll do Vegas in this one. I think that they could win a series. Will be interesting to very, very interesting to see though, because they kind of blitzkrieged the NHL to start the season, and they haven't been that good lately. I mean, they've been they've good enough obviously to still win their division, but it'll be a very interesting series to see them against a team that's very tried and true in the playoffs, and the Kings, where maybe they haven't had some success recently, but they've obviously a lot of them have been there before.
Anze Kopitar is a Hart Trophy candidate for me, just because he's kind of lugged the Kings into this position.
Because the Kings made the playoffs,
yeah. And I just think Gerard Gallant is just a smart enough coach to where he's going to figure out how to shut down Anze Kopitar in a 7-game series.
You've got one player that we know that is very good at shutting down an opposing center. Just throwing it out there.
Giles, is that fire? Did you light something on fire?
So I picked the Vegas Golden Knights to win the series. Yeah, sure. Moving on, Anaheim, San Jose. This will probably be another great matchup in the first round because both teams have really been on fire since at least a trade deadline. Yeah. So I think you're going to get some very highly contested hockey games here, and I'm gonna start this one off, and I'm gonna take the Sharks. I think this is where Evander Kane really makes his money, and he has at least an incredible first round series, if not more, moving forward.
Sure.
I want the Sharks. So the Sharks don't. Game 7 will be in Anaheim, though, right?
Yes. Yep. Anaheim got the home on.
The Sharks needed to win against the Wild last night, and they laid an egg.
I know they were terrible. I couldn't believe Thornton and they're right. I mean,
I got home second period after the NCAA title game. I was like, how are the Sharks playing this bad? And I was like, do they have nothing to play for? And I looked it up, and I'm like, this is absurd.
They brought it up on the broadcast. Yeah, I think that's going to be really fun. And I would say this. I think the Sharks fans, I know, hate the Ducks more than the Kings.
Sure.
So I think it's going to be, I'm going to pick Sharks because I'm a sad sap.
You're San Jose.
But I think it's going to be, I think that's almost Flyers. Not quite, but it's a little Flyers.
It's a good NorCal. Yeah. I'm going to go with the Ducks. I really like the Ducks. I think life's not fair, and Randy Carlyle doesn't deserve to win a playoff series.
Bruce Boudreau's alter ego.
Right. But I really like John Gibson.
He is so good and an underrated goalie.
Very underrated, and Ducks, I mentioned this in my mailbag on Friday. Don't be shocked if the Ducks come out of the West, because John Gibson is, he's legit. He's been in the playoffs before. He's been through it. I really like John Gibson as much as I hate Randy Carlyle and virtually everyone else on the Ducks. I really like John Gibson.
Can I tell you something about the Ducks? Just kidding. Nashville and Colorado.
I just noticed a Giles hat, by the way. Giles, can you describe your hat real quick?
Paul Korea.
Who do you say Nashville and Colorado?
We all think Nashville will win, right?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think...
Is that a sweep?
No.
No. I think Colorado...
I give Colorado
like I said, Colorado will give Nashville more problems than the Blues ever could. Because I think that they're faster and they can skate with Nashville.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's just not that much quality in Colorado's line. I mean, after McKinnon, who does Colorado have?
Do you think that's 5? They win 1 in Pepsi Center.
Yeah, I think that's what I give. I give Pepsi Center.
Yeah, 5. I mean, 6 at best. Kind of like a Wild Series thing. Yeah.
All right, and we did Wild Jets. Everybody took Winnipeg, and then lastly, we did have a listener question. Very quickly here, we asked about backup teams, who everyone was taking, since seemingly the Minnesota Wild are expected to have a quick exit in the playoffs here. So we did want to ask our listeners who they are going for, and I'm going to throw it afterwards to the floor here to see who everyone's going. First, reply to our Twitter account from Jessica is cool, says the Preds. Aaron Kelly says the Preds. Bruins for the East. Chad, not Chad Graff, but Chad says none, and it's a photoshopped Boudreaux. I'm not sure what that is, but
that might be illegal.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
We have Trent Nelson says Tampa Bay is my girlfriend team. Andy Pletcher says Sharks in the West, Devils in the East. Makalewski says bandwagoning Vegas in the West. In the East, Flyers, to name one. Zeke Boyett, Vegas in the West, Columbus in the East. JB says the Sharks because the Sharks are effing cool.
Yeah.
So I open it to the floor. Tom Schreier, who's your backup team? Is it the Sharks?
Sharks, although I would say in the East, I'd go either Pittsburgh or Lightning. They're both fun.
What about Ben Remington?
I mean, you guys know where my allegiances lie in the Western Conference. I'm going with the sweet Golden Knights.
Sweet Golden Knights.
Yes, that's what I'm feeling. I do like them to win their first series against the Kings. But
it's kind of a crapshoot in the next round.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot after that. So I don't know. I think Fleury is the kind of goalie that can do hot and cold. And then, it'd be a really fun story to see Vegas do that. What Giles? What's your?
I've gone into the woods.
Backup team.
I've taken the stats. I've taken everything I can with me to do meticulous research on who my backup team will be. You look at the West. You see, I don't care. Like maybe Vegas if they can get out of the first round, but I have a problem believing it. Then I look out in the East, and I narrowed the field after, Philly has a garbage head coach. Columbus, I just don't see it. Pittsburgh, I'm tired. So I came back. As the wise Michael Scott says, I'm ready to be hurt again.
Oh, good God.
That is the right jersey, by the way. The correct jersey. I love this. Is that a North Star shirt underneath that?
Sorry, Tom. I threw the microphone.
Yeah, no. I hope it's fine. But is that a North Star shirt underneath that?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh.
I threw on a shirt that was clean. I'm sorry, it doesn't matter.
No, I was just gonna say we have a sweet Capitals jersey, the Korea hat. This is Giles, peak Giles.
Yeah.
Here. If that was North Stars underneath,
it would be very brand. It would be 100% brand.
I'm ready to be hurt again. So that's
good to hear.
That's our listener question. Also, shout out to Nighthawk, who also named the Washington Capitals as his backup team. It's you, me, and Chris Long, Mr. Nighthawk. We are all in this. We are all in this together. All right, so that we can call it a wrap on this show. Thank you to Mirada Tesh for joining us from the Winnipeg Athletic. Thank you to Tom Schreier for producing this otherwise fine podcast. You can find Tom on Twitter at T. Schreier 3. He is the brain trust behind zonecoverage.com. He also does dabble in some Wolves and Twins coverage when the beat guys take a day off, which I don't think is fair, but lousy laws. I'm just kidding.
Mooching war widows.
I'm just kidding. I love everyone. Yeah. So Ben is on Twitter at Ben Remington. You can find myself on Twitter at Giles Farrell. The Giles and the Goalie podcast is on Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. We are on Facebook as well. And find our production on SoundCloud, iTunes. Do subscribe, drop us a rating. We have a YouTube channel. Find us on iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. So with that said, thank you for listening to our extended playoff preview edition show, and we will catch up with you next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.